I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great God. We talked about a supper, yes? Already. What was it? Supper of the Lamb. There's 4 suppers spoken of in Scripture. 4. The first one is in Jesus' parable about salvation and the supper. I believe Luke 14. And Jesus equates the salvation equation to a supper. People that are invited and people that are not. And so that's the first one that's spoken of, is the supper of salvation. The second one that's spoken of is what we do the first Sunday of every month. What is that? Communion. The supper, which kicked off at what? The Last Supper. And so you've got the supper of salvation, you've got the supper of communion, which is in remembrance of the crucifixion, and then you've got these 2 suppers. The supper of the Lamb, which is a party in heaven, and the supper of a great God, which is those that didn't make it to the last. And so if you reject the first supper, the supper of salvation, the second one means nothing to you. Communion is but a joke. It's a hilarious religious tradition where you eat some bread and you drink some grape juice and you think something cool has happened. That's what the religious people teach. Because if you reject the first, the second one makes no sense. And if you reject the first, which means the second doesn't make sense, guess what? You're not invited to the third. And if you've rejected the first, you don't get the second, you're not invited to the third, guess what? You will be present at the fourth. And it's a horrific scene. And so while one supper is taking place in heaven, which is the grandest of all parties in eternity, there's another supper that takes place on earth, at the other end of Jesus' reign. It's the supper of the great God. In verse 18 it says, that you may eat the flesh of kings. He just hearkened all these birds to now feast on the flesh of kings. The flesh of mighty men. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The flesh of captains, don't forget those guys. The flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great.